On the 7th of December, 1982, two men and two women get into a car in the parking lot of the American Embassy. This is observed by a policeman standing at the post at the entrance, who immediately reports to the Committee for State Security. The Soviet Special Services were eavesdropping on the conversations of embassy employees via the city telephone, so the KGB already knew that the diplomats were gathering for a planned celebration on the occasion of a colleague's birthday. What the Soviet intelligence services did not know was that the two men getting into the car were actually CIA officers. The planned party was merely a cover story, the large cake in the hands of one of the women, a secret device, and all of it was the beginning of a complex operation codenamed Jack in the Box. There is much in common between magicians and spies. The main task of both is to distract the observer's attention. In the case of the American agents, their audience is the USSR's intelligence services, that is, viewers with a discerning eye. Representatives of the Committee for State Security almost always monitored the vehicles of United States diplomats. The Soviet Special Services car followed at a short distance behind during surveillance. This means that when turning onto the next street, the American agent's car was not visible to the KGB for a brief moment. During these seconds, the magic had to happen. The vehicle of the American diplomats travels through the streets of Moscow. The agent in the front passenger seat, beneath the top layer of American clothing, is dressed in the attire of a typical Soviet pensioner. On the lap of the woman sitting behind him is a cake. In reality, it is a complex mechanism resembling a children's toy with a clown on a spring known as Jack in the Box. Around 7 in the evening, the American's car turns onto the necessary street. The driver slightly slows down, the door opens, and the agent jumps out from the passenger seat, already resembling a Soviet pensioner. At that moment, the woman in the back places the cake where the jumping agent was sitting. She pulls a lever, and from the box emerges a dummy resembling the silhouette of the absent colleague. Everything takes place within a matter of seconds. The disguised CIA agent manages to take only a few steps on the sidewalk before the KGB surveillance car appears from around the corner. They see that there are still 4 people in the car with the Americans, and it continues to follow the planned route. The illusion succeeded. However, this is not yet the end of the operation. The CIA agent will further change his appearance, ride several trams, and walk through a few streets on foot to be absolutely sure that he is not being tailed. After all, the person the American is supposed to meet is the most valuable agent of the United States intelligence services on the territory of the Soviet Union, a billion-dollar spy. Spies are almost mythical beings. Most civilians have seen them only in feature films, and if not for occasional news about captures, exchanges, and deportations of agents, they could easily be placed on the same list as elves and unicorns. Therefore, the story I'm going to tell you today is almost like a door into a spy Narnia. It will contain all the familiar attributes of a special agent film. Safe houses, hidden cameras, lethal pills in ballpoint pens, secret signs, organizing surveillance and escaping it, disguise and encrypted texts. But importantly, in this case, it is an absolutely documentary narrative. The characters have birth dates, death dates, and a unique biography in between. The main character is one of the most successful American intelligence agents in the USSR. The Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, emerged as a result of a catastrophe. In the year 1941, Pearl Harbor happened. The unexpected Japanese attack caused the deaths of several thousand American military personnel, and dozens of ships were damaged or destroyed. According to government investigations, one of the main reasons the tragedy occurred was the poorly coordinated work between various intelligence agencies. To prevent such happenings in the future, in the year 1947, the CIA was established, the first centralized intelligence service in United States history. In the years following its founding, the organization significantly expanded its functions, and espionage and covert operations became part of the CIA's tasks. The agency took the front line on the Cold War fronts. The main adversary was the Soviet Union. The CIA actively gathered information outside the USSR. Refugees, emigrants, Soviet military personnel and employees deep within missions around the world. Meanwhile, the Americans perfectly understood that the best sources of information were inside the country. And this was the main problem. The Soviet state tightly controlled the lives of its citizens. In terms of rights and freedoms, not very good, but from the perspective of combating foreign spies, truly phenomenal. One CIA employee in the early 50s admitted that recruiting an agent with access to important information within the Soviet Union was about as difficult as landing spies on Mars. Therefore, American information about the USSR's military plans at that time was extremely scant, and this is very dangerous under Cold War conditions, which could escalate into a hot one. The year 1953, Vienna. An unknown man handed an envelope to an American diplomat. The letter was in Russian. Its author, Major of the main intelligence directorate, Pyotr Popov, serving in Vienna. He offered cooperation to the Americans. Over the course of the following several years, Popov became the most valuable Soviet agent for the CIA. He provided the Americans with a multitude of secret materials, including plans for the use of the USSR's nuclear weapons in the event of war. In the year 1958, due to suspicions, Popov was urgently summoned to Moscow, interrogated, and the fact of his betrayal was uncovered. Initially, the KGB used the spy as a double agent to feed disinformation to the Americans. In the process, Popov managed to send a short message to the CIA that he had been discovered. Tried by the Soviet court, the spy was sentenced to the highest measure and executed by firing squad. The year 1961, Moscow. Oleg Penkovsky, a deputy head of the State Committee for the Coordination of Scientific Research. His complex position was in fact merely a cover. Penkovsky was a colonel in the GRU. During numerous foreign trips, he conducted secret operations with the aim of stealing Western technologies. During one reception for foreign businessmen in Moscow, he handed a letter to a British citizen. In it, Penkovsky appealed to the American and British authorities. Over the course of several years, the new agent provided CIA officials with 6,000 photographs of secret documents concerning Soviet armed forces. These documents played a crucial role during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Thanks to Penkovsky, the West had much information on the latest developments and the locations of Soviet missiles. At the end of the year 1962, the agent unexpectedly disappeared. Shortly thereafter, it was revealed that Penkovsky had fallen under the suspicion of the KGB. Hidden cameras were installed in his apartment, and during a later search, Western espionage equipment and other evidence of collaboration with foreign intelligence services were discovered there. Penkovsky's trial in the year 1963 was held publicly, with details widely covered by Soviet media. In the same year, the spy was sentenced to death and executed by firing squad. After this, the activity of the Moscow residency practically froze for many years. The total number of CIA agents working under the cover of embassy staff did not exceed a few individuals. The CIA leadership feared that even if they managed to recruit valuable personnel within the Union, there was a high probability they would turn out to be KGB plants, intended to supply false information to the Americans. This version was only confirmed by the story of Pyotr Popov. Such a cautious approach persisted until the mid-70s. At various levels within the CIA, generational changes were occurring. Young, more daring operatives who wanted to take action were arriving. January of the year 1977. The head of the CIA's Moscow station, Robert Fulton, refuels his vehicle. This gas station in central Moscow was primarily used by diplomats from various countries. At the moment when Fulton gets into his car, a stranger approaches him. A stout man of medium height, appearing to be in his 50s, dressed in a coat and fur hat, like millions of Soviet men. The stranger asks in English, "Are you American? I need to talk to you." Fulton wonders what he wants. Then the man unexpectedly switches to Russian, says, "I apologize," hands Fulton a note and quickly leaves. The scene lasts literally 15 seconds. The note contains several sentences in Russian. The author states that he wants to confidentially meet with a representative of the American embassy to discuss important matters. The message also includes a detailed sketch of the meeting plan. The head of the Moscow CIA department reads this note in the very room on the 7th floor of the embassy. Only here can American agents feel safe and be themselves. Outside the residency, even within the embassy building, they must act cautiously and within their cover story. All CIA representatives came to work in the USSR under diplomatic cover. According to the documents, they are diplomatic workers of the American embassy, so most of the time agents were engaged in standard bureaucratic work. They knew very well that they were being watched, not only outside the deep representative office, but also inside. The embassy's service staff was mostly composed of Soviet citizens, some of whom provided information to the KGB. Fulton sends information about the note and the encounter with the stranger at the gas station to headquarters at Langley. From there, the response comes not to make contact, as it might be a trap. A few weeks later, the stranger again approaches Fulton's car, this time near the US Embassy building in Moscow. He hands over a note. It again offers a meeting and coordinates, but no additional information. The CIA still decides not to make contact. Another couple of weeks pass, and the same man passes a new letter to the head of the residency. This time, it contains more information. The stranger writes that he understands the Americans' concerns and identifies himself as an engineer working at a closed facility related to defense. The man again proposes a new date and place for the meeting. The head of the Moscow residency, Fulton, believes that the contact is not working for the KGB, otherwise he would not make so many attempts to convey the message. However, the headquarters of the CIA remains skeptical. What are the odds that the stranger approached a random car in the diplomatic parking lot and happened upon the head of the Moscow residency? Fulton believed it was indeed a coincidence, and the man simply chose the first car with American plates. Either way, the authorities once again decide not to make contact. Several months later, Fulton ignores the man's attempt to hand him a certain package. Such caution at that moment is explained by yet another factor. In just the last year, the CIA lost several valuable Soviet agents, including within the USSR. The most well-known among them was Alexander Ogorodnik, a Soviet diplomat recruited during his tenure in Colombia. Ogorodnik enjoyed the finer things in life and agreed to cooperate with the Americans in exchange for a generous reward. Shortly after his initial contacts in Colombia, Ogorodnik was transferred to a higher position in Moscow. There, he continued his cooperation with the CIA. Often the exchange of information occurred through so-called dead drops. These were specific places where the recruited agent would leave secret documents, photographs, or other important information, and a CIA officer would later pick up the package. This method worked in reverse as well, allowing the Americans to deliver something to the agent. It was a fairly old espionage practice, even for that time, but relatively safe. In this case, the CIA representative did not meet the contact person in person. However, in the year 1977, the KGB arrested an employee of the American embassy while she was attempting to collect a package from Alexander Ogorodnik. The employee was actually working for the CIA. It later transpired that Ogorodnik had been detained earlier and, during interrogation, had managed to swallow a lethal capsule hidden in a pen provided by the Americans. The embassy employee was declared persona non grata on the day of her arrest and immediately expelled from the country. This happened with nearly all contacts caught spying. Thus, in case of an operation failure, the CIA would suffer doubly, losing not only the recruited agent but also their undercover operative. This is why the intelligence headquarters reacted so cautiously to the attempts of an unfamiliar man to pass a letter to an embassy employee. If it turned out to be a KGB trap in a face-to-face meeting, the CIA would lose yet another agent in Moscow without gaining any valuable information from the contact. Nearly a year passed after the first contact with the stranger at the gas station. The man made 2 new attempts to deliver a message to the driver of a car with American license plates at the same gas station. This time, he encountered regular embassy employees, who passed the letter to the CIA representatives. The stranger took a bold step and fully revealed his identity in the message. I, Tolkachev Adolf Georgievich, have been working at the Scientific Research Institute of Radio Engineering since 1954, currently holding the position of chief designer. Both letters were fairly comprehensive, in which Tolkachev detailed his biography, provided the full names of his wife and 12-year-old son, and included his home and work phone numbers, as well as his residential address. Tolkachev also expressed his readiness to provide details of the latest secret radar he was working on at the Design Bureau. After verification, the CIA headquarters decided that the contact could be trusted. He potentially had valuable information, and agents needed to meet him. The new contact was assigned the code name Sphere. In the year 1976, Soviet pilot Viktor Belenko made a daring escape. He flew his MiG-25 interceptor aircraft from an airfield in the Far East to Japan and surrendered. Belenko was granted political asylum in the United States. In exchange for this, he provided the Americans with secret information about the latest developments in military fighters and radar systems. Adolf Tolkachev frequently listened to the radio station Voice of America, one of the few means for Soviet citizens to receive news bypassing Soviet censorship. It was there that Tolkachev heard the story of the defector pilot. In one of his letters to the CIA, he explicitly stated his desire to do what Belenko had done. In addition, Tolkachev explained how the designs of the MiG-25 were altered after the pilot's defection and was prepared to provide information on the latest developments in this field. He was referring to a secret radar for fighter jets. For a long time, the Soviet armed forces had a significant vulnerability in the area of radar. The existing designs were very poor at detecting low-flying objects, whether aircraft or missiles. This potentially gave the Americans serious advantages. Information on such developments greatly influenced the CIA's decision to meet Tolkachev. The information was of utmost importance to the Americans. Moreover, it was unlikely that the KGB would disclose such sensitive facts in a letter just to catch and expel yet another CIA agent. In the Moscow station, Tolkachev was assigned a handler. This is a CIA officer who works most closely with the agent, including contacting them by phone or meeting in person. John Gilsher was born and raised in the United States. His parents emigrated from Russia after the revolution. As a result, Gilsher spoke almost perfect Russian, and his slight accent more likely suggested he was from Latvia or Estonia rather than an American. After serving in the army, John accepted an invitation to work for the CIA and eventually ended up in the Moscow station. John Gilsher became Adolf Tolkachev's handler, task number 1 to contact the new agent. The CIA had Tolkachev's home number, but simply calling from the embassy was not feasible. The KGB kept a close watch on American diplomats, eavesdropping in the apartments of employees, wiretapping embassy phones, placing bugs in clothing or typewriters, and, of course, surveillance. To communicate with agents by phone, CIA employees in Moscow used public telephones. Gilsher and his wife devised an entire operation. The couple planned in advance a trip to the Bolshoi Theatre. During one of the intermissions, Gilsher stepped out to make his first contact with Tolkachev. At that moment, his wife distracted their Soviet embassy colleague, who was working for the KGB at the theatre. During the brief call, the CIA officer greeting Tolkachev stated that the agency had received his letters and would soon get in touch with him in more detail. Afterward, Gilsher returned to the auditorium. Their colleague working for the KGB did not notice a thing. During the next call, the CIA provides Tolkachev with the coordinates where he can retrieve the package with detailed instructions. It will be waiting for the agent near a phone booth on one of the streets. The transfer will be hidden in a work glove. Tolkachev successfully retrieves the package. There he finds a detailed plan on how to pass the secret information to the CIA. In this case, it is the so-called secret letter. The Americans prepared a fake letter for Tolkachev, supposedly sent by an American tourist from Moscow to her grandfather in the States. According to the plan, the agent must write the secret data he knows on the reverse side of the letter pages. This needs to be done using specially provided carbon paper and encrypted in the form of a code. After that, the agent must send the letter to a dummy American address, which actually leads to the CIA. The agency knows that the KGB will likely open the envelope for inspection. This is a common practice for foreign correspondence. However, the Soviet Special Services should not notice the coded text, as it will be invisible. And even if they discover it, they won't be able to decrypt it. Tolkachev was provided a special table for creating the code. Only the CIA also possessed such a table, so only they could crack this code. As a result, a few weeks later, the Moscow residency receives Tolkachev's letter. It bears traces of being opened. However, the secret code is in place. Using it, the agent reveals information about the latest Soviet developments in the fields of certain radars, targeting systems, and test results. The information is of great value to the Americans. In addition, Tolkachev flawlessly followed all the instructions in preparing the message. It is time to meet with him in person. Establishing closer contact and discussing terms of cooperation are necessary. A personal meeting with the informant on the territory of the Union is a big risk. If the information leaks, it will cause a major diplomatic scandal. However, the CIA is confident in the necessity of such a meeting. A Soviet agent on the country's territory with access to secret developments has long been a target for the CIA. Tolkachev may become that valuable source. In the late 70s, Adolf Tolkachev turned 50. In the Soviet system of coordinates, he could be considered a successful person. The high position of the chief designer at the Phasotron Bureau in a research institute working for the needs of the military-industrial complex. This photo vividly reflects the social status of the newly minted CIA agent. In the foreground is the American embassy in the center of Moscow, and Tolkachev's apartment was located in this high-rise nearby. Such housing could only be obtained by comrades holding important positions. One of the first questions John Gilcher asks at the personal meeting is Tolkachev's motivation. What drove him to take such a risk? He initially tries to dodge the question, saying that it's a complex issue and would require a lot of time, and in the end simply states that he is a dissident by nature. They then move on to discussing financial matters. Tolkachev again references the case of pilot Belenko and says he would like to receive the same amount from the USA as he did. Gilcher responds that he is unaware of Belenko's reward and hands over 1,000 rubles, mentioning that the CIA is ready to pay a similar amount each month. Tolkachev asks for 10,000, but both amounts are quite laughable considering the potential risks. In his position as chief designer at a closed enterprise, he earned more than 300 rubles a month, which was several times more than the average Soviet engineer. Later, Tolkachev admits that he needs the money more as a form of recognition, since due to constant shortages, even in the capital, many goods were impossible to buy. The agent hands Gilcher a notebook containing a new batch of secret data. He immediately notes that if the CIA provided him with a camera, he would be able to photograph documents, for example, at the end of the workday when colleagues left the office. Because copying and redrawing detailed schemes is difficult and time-consuming. Tolkachev and Gilcher spent about 40 minutes together, walking along the empty, dark streets of January Moscow. Following the meeting, the CIA representative wrote to his superiors that the new agent demonstrated a responsible approach to the task and expressed willingness to continue cooperation. For subsequent meetings, the CIA develops a special plan. They choose several locations not too far from Tolkachev's home, so he could leave under the pretext of a walk. Each location has the name of a Russian first name like Valera or Nina. First, a CIA officer calls Tolkachev's home and asks for Valera. Tolkachev must respond that the caller got the wrong number and hang up. Then he leaves home to meet the handler at the location named Valera. Over the following meetings, the agent continues to pass valuable information to the CIA. For instance, significant details of the design and systems of the newest Su-27 fighter jet. The CIA agrees to provide Tolkachev with a miniature camera and half the amount he demanded. 5,000 rubles. However, the agent's demands quickly grow. At the next meeting, he asks the CIA to provide him with a poison capsule in case of capture, and also significantly increases the price. Now he demands a 6-digit figure in dollars. Allegedly, Voice of America reported such an amount as a reward for pilot Belenko. For the CIA, the new demand is certainly a problem. A poison capsule for a relatively new agent is a significant risk, should he panic and use it in a non-threatening situation. Plus, if somehow the authorities discover the capsule on Tolkachev, it would immediately arouse unequivocal suspicion towards him. The hundreds of thousands of dollars that Tolkachev was asking for were an impressive sum. During those times, the value of a single dollar in the USSR was estimated at several rubles. This discussion, of course, pertains to the black market, as free currency purchase and sale were not possible. Firstly, the Moscow residency needed to prove to headquarters in Langley that the new agent was worth that money. Secondly, there arose the logistical question of where Tolkachev would store the funds and whether he could responsibly spend them without arousing suspicion. Consequently, the CIA decided against giving the agent a poison capsule for the time being, but agreed to the financial terms. Analyzing the data provided by Tolkachev, the Americans realized they could save their military-industrial complex tens of millions of dollars. Possessing information on Soviet developments, the United States could allocate the resources of its military-industrial complex more effectively. Furthermore, the new agent impressed with his responsible and strategic approach. In one letter to his handler, he provided a detailed plan projected for the next 12 years. The plan outlined what information Tolkachev could potentially supply the Americans and what resources and time he would need. The goal of Agent Sphere, according to his own words, was to inflict maximum damage on the Soviet Union. Why? Tolkachev did not disclose. Spy gadgets from Bond films seem almost fantastical, except when delving into real espionage history. In the year 1979, the CIA provided Adolf Tolkachev with a camera called Molly. It was smaller than a matchbox in size. This was intended to significantly aid Agent Sphere in the espionage process. Until then, he had to rewrite everything. He could not use copiers at the Institute. Management feared potential espionage with these devices. Special staff were always present in the copying room, and no one else was permitted entry. Additionally, a strict procedure for using the machines was enforced. Which documents were copied, for whom, when, and other details were meticulously recorded. Thus, the camera became a logical solution. Removing documents from the Institute building was prohibited. However, Tolkachev learned to deceive the system. He would take documents from the storage, conceal them under his coat and go out for lunch. Then he would go home, calmly rewrite or take photographs, return to the Institute at the end of lunch, and return the documents. The first experience using the secret camera called Molly proved unsuccessful. After developing, the CIA realized Tolkachev had taken photographs in insufficiently lit areas, rendering them illegible. Following this, Tolkachev was provided with one of the latest developments, a camera called Tropel, the size of an AA battery, as well as a Pentax camera as a backup option. During the 79th year, Gilsha meets with Tolkachev 5 times. For Gilsha, each meeting entailed a carefully orchestrated operation. The KGB fully understood that some embassy staff worked for the CIA. Moreover, often they even knew precisely who. Consequently, surveillance was an inseparable part of the lives of Moscow's resident agents. Before meeting with Tolkachev, Gilsha had to ensure each time that he had evaded detection. To do so, a CIA officer, for example, might ostensibly leave the Union on an overseas business trip, only to return to Moscow unexpectedly sooner than anticipated. While it took time for information from the border guards to reach the KGB, Gilsha had literally a few hours to meet with the agent without being tailed. Disguises and other methods were also frequently employed. Every CIA officer underwent special training in this area. Such precautions helped the CIA meet safely with Agent Sphere. In general, the Americans tried to use personal meetings for information exchange as rarely as possible, but in this case the initiative came from Tolkachev. He valued personal contact highly. In the CIA, they were increasingly accommodating considering the agent's growing value. Using cameras, Tolkachev's productivity surged dramatically. He brought to meetings hundreds of pages of secret notes and hundreds of films with photos of documents and schematics. This included top-secret radar developments for the MiG-25 aircraft and the state of missile defense, as well as strategic documentation on the development of specific systems on military aircraft up to the year 1990. Tolkachev was aware of his value to the CIA. Gilsher already brought substantial bundles of cash to their meetings, totaling more than 100,000 rubles. Yet the Sphere agent once again raised the stakes. He stated that he had been mistaken the last time and needed not a six-figure sum but a sum with 6 zeros. This meant millions of dollars. Such an unprecedented demand caused no small stir at CIA headquarters in Langley. Never before in the agency's history had an agent received such a reward. It was a staggering amount. After lengthy discussions, the CIA agreed. They were prepared to pay $200,000 at once and then $300,000 annually. The reason for the Americans' decision was simple. They understood that Adolf Tolkachev was worth such an amount. The data he provided would remain relevant for the next 8 to 10 years. At the beginning of the 80th year, US Air Force experts evaluated that the secret information from Agent Sphere was valued at approximately $2 billion. Adolf Tolkachev officially became a billion-dollar spy. Forbes magazine was not circulated in the USSR. Forbes did not publish lists of the highest-paid spies. Forbes could not write that the chief designer, albeit notable, but still from one of the Soviet bureaus, Adolf Tolkachev, had an income higher than the President of the United States. The 70s and early 80s in the USSR are commonly referred to as the stagnation era. One of the main questions was not how to earn money, but how to obtain it. In conditions of constant scarcity, Tolkachev could hardly physically spend the entire sum that the CIA paid him. He simply stored most of the rubles he received, along with espionage equipment at home in a closet, where his wife and son did not look. Tolkachev received goods from the Americans that were difficult or impossible to obtain in the Union. These included books by dissident authors that were not printed in the country, good razors, French medicines, Czech stationery, records of Western rock bands for his son, and other items. Part of the payment to Tolkachev was placed into a special foreign bank account. The CIA offered the agent Sphere to consider the prospect of exfiltration. This referred to the secret operation of extracting a spy from the country. Initially, Tolkachev did not seriously consider this option, but gradually began to ponder the possibility. However, it is worth noting that there was no discussion of immediate extraction. First, the Americans were interested in having the valuable agent supply information for as long as possible. Second, exfiltration was a complex procedure that required more than a year of preparation. And the Moscow residency had only one such experience. In the year 1980, KGB Major Viktor Shemov, with his wife and daughter, secretly crossed the border of the USSR and Finland. They were hidden in a car by CIA operatives. Then the family was transported to the United States. A year earlier, disillusioned with the Soviet regime, the young officer Shemov contacted the CIA in Moscow. His initial condition for cooperation was escape to the States. After Shemov's successful extraction, the KGB for several months believed that their officer with his family had fallen victim to ordinary crime and therefore disappeared. This exfiltration became the first assignment in the Moscow residency for the newly arrived officer David Rolf. He was slightly over 30. It was Rolf who became the new handler for Adolf Tolkachev. One evening in October 1980, David Rolf and his wife entered the building of the American Embassy in Moscow. A policeman at the entrance recorded their arrival. Rolf immediately headed to the room for technical specialists. There he changed clothes, applied makeup, and became similar in appearance to one of the embassy's technical staff. The KGB monitored such ordinary employees far less than potential CIA agents. David Rolf, in his new guise, left the building. He then acted according to the techniques and rules he had learned during his CIA training. He took a tram, entered a flower shop, got on a bus, walked along the street. All this time, Rolf carefully scanned the cars driving nearby, other passengers and passers-by. At the very end, Rolf dashed into one of the entranceways and quickly climbed the stairs. This was meant to provoke potential state security representatives into pursuing him. For some time, he stands on the staircase waiting. All is quiet. The entire operation to cover their tracks lasts approximately 1.5 hours. Finally, at 9 in the evening, Rolf is at the designated location. This is his first meeting with the agent, Sphere. After introductions, they proceed to discuss current matters. Rolf informs Tolkachev that his request for a capsule of poison has finally been granted, and he will receive it at one of the following meetings. Previously, the spy had persistently requested this from the CIA, but the agency repeatedly refused him. Increased risks in the activities of the agent Sphere were one of the motivations for the change in position. The fact is, when obtaining secret documents from the storage of the research institute, an employee had to sign a document. The problem was that on his initiative and at the CIA's requests, Tolkachev had already taken quite a few documents that were not related to his immediate activities in the Bureau. If the KGB decided to check the signatures, everything would become obvious. Tolkachev would be immediately arrested. Moreover, security rules at the Research Institute had changed. Now, when receiving documents from the repository, the employee was required to leave their pass there. Simultaneously, the pass was needed to enter the building, meaning that taking documents from the repository, hiding them under a coat, going home during a lunch break, photographing the documents, and then returning to the institute was no longer possible for Agent Sphere. Tolkachev tells his handler at the meeting that he found a solution with the help of an acquaintance in the repository, who agreed to provide documents without a pass. To the CIA officer's question whether this was dangerous, Tolkachev answers philosophically, "Everything is dangerous." In Moscow's residency, they decide to prepare a duplicate pass for the agent, but this will take time, so Tolkachev will continue to take risks in the meantime. In the year 1981, the exposure of Agent Sphere occurs. However, this is not done by the KGB or the Institute's leadership, but by his own wife. Tolkachev's wife Natalia finds a camera and several other CIA devices at home. Tolkachev forgot to remove the evidence after photographing documents during lunch. His wife immediately realizes that her husband is engaged in espionage. Tolkachev does not deny it and admits to working for the KGB. Natalia points out that in this way, Adolf is endangering her and their son, and asks him to cease his espionage activities. Tolkachev decides to lie and promises that he will stop. At the moment when Natalia discovered the espionage equipment on her husband's table, she likely did not suspect that the agent Sphere largely came about thanks to her. Natalia's maiden name is Kuzmina. Her father, Ivan Kuzmin, was the editor of the industrial newspaper Light Industry. His wife Sofia was born to a family of Ukrainian Jews. Sofia's father later moved to Denmark, where he engaged successfully in business. Occasionally, his daughter visited him in Europe. Shortly after another trip in the year 1937, she was arrested by Soviet security services. In the height of Stalin's purges, simply having a close relative abroad in a capitalist country was sufficient grounds for suspicion. Sofia was formally accused of participating in a Trotskyist community. A week later, her husband Ivan was arrested. Sofia was executed within a few months. Ivan was sent to the camps for 10 years. Their 2-year-old daughter Natalia ended up in an orphanage. Ivan Kuzmin was released in the year 1947. He died in the mid-50s, a year after his rehabilitation. Shortly before his death, Ivan told his daughter what really happened to him and his wife. Tolkachev knew that his wife had refused to sign a work letter supporting the USSR's invasion of Czechoslovakia in the year 1968, and generally did not harbor warm feelings towards the USSR. He also knew her family's history, and this became one of the main motives for Tolkachev to collaborate with the CIA. The future spy himself was born in the late 20s in Kazakhstan. In early childhood, his family moved to Moscow. After graduating from college, Tolkachev was assigned to the Radio Engineering Research Institute, also known as Phasotron. This was Tolkachev's only workplace. He did not engage in active political activity, yet he read banned literature, followed famous dissidents like Sakharov and Solzhenitsyn, and listened to Voice of America radio. His desire to damage the Soviet system grew gradually. After the famous story of pilot Belenko, Tolkachev realized that his main weapon against the USSR was secret documents, report diagrams, and other vital information about the military industry. In one of his letters to the CIA, he confessed that he had never been to the States and in general was far from romanticizing the country. However, he had the impression that he could live there. Therefore, Tolkachev decided to supply secret data specifically to the Americans. In the year 1982, the leadership at the CIA's Moscow station changed. The new leadership focused on so-called deep cover agents. Generally, the CIA employees' cover was genuine diplomatic work, routine embassy tasks. Deep cover agents arrived as service workers. The KGB initially monitored such people less. Plus, for some time after arriving in Moscow, the agents effectively lived a repetitive routine: workshop home once a week, Sunday skating rink. Thus, Soviet intelligence services lost all interest in them. Moreover, deep cover agents were always recruits. They had not worked in stations in other parts of the world, therefore the KGB had no information on them. It was with such CIA employees that Tolkachev now met. Despite being provided with a special radio transmitter that could be used to communicate with the Americans remotely, he still insisted on personal contact. Therefore, the CIA agents arranged meetings with Agent Sphere on the street or in his car, which Tolkachev had purchased quite recently. Despite the increased security measures at the Institute, he still manages to supply the CIA with hundreds of valuable photographs, documents, and diagrams in almost every encounter. However, in the middle of the year 1982, something strange occurs. Tolkachev misses several meetings. A few more meetings are cancelled due to suspicions of KGB surveillance. Finally, the agents call Tolkachev at home. No one answers the call. Tension is rising in the Moscow residency. There is no news from their most valuable CIA spy for several months. At the beginning of December, another meeting with Tolkachev is scheduled. This time, in order to surely avoid KGB surveillance, the Moscow residency prepares a complex operation called Jack in the Box. A CIA officer manages to evade surveillance and finally meets with Tolkachev. He apologizes and explains that he has been feeling unwell lately due to high blood pressure and therefore fell out of schedule. Nevertheless, Tolkachev still brought with him numerous records and tapes with photographs of secret documents. By the beginning of the year 83, the CIA has a plan for the exfiltration of Agent Sphere ready. The Americans are prepared to take Tolkachev and his family to the States. However, Tolkachev himself eventually declines this plan. He talks about his acquaintances who emigrated to Israel and write about longing for their homeland. Tolkachev says that he realized he cannot live in another country or even another city. Therefore, the escape plan is no longer considered. For the Americans, in some sense, this is positive news. Their valuable agent continues his work. In April of the year 1983, Tolkachev is summoned by the management to discuss a routine matter. At that moment, a phone call rings in the manager's office. From the conversation, Tolkachev understands that on the other end of the line is the Institute's security chief, who reports directly to the KGB. He requests a list of people who worked on a certain type of radar. Information about this very radar was literally passed by Tolkachev to the CIA a month ago. In horror, he returns to his office. Tolkachev wonders how the KGB found out. Perhaps there is a mole in the CIA. Perhaps one of his colleagues at the Institute became suspicious of him. In any case, the next day, Tolkachev takes sick leave. He hastily gathers bundles of cash, cameras, the CIA transmitter, dissident books and foreign goods. He throws the items into his car and drives out of town. There, Tolkachev burns the evidence. The metal parts he scatters out of the car window on the way to Moscow. The next day, before going to the manager's office, Adolf Tolkachev takes a poison capsule out of his pen and places it under his tongue. He is convinced that KGB officers will meet him there. However, it turns out to be another routine matter. Over the next few weeks, Tolkachev puts the capsule under his tongue every time he goes to the management. He also carries poison to every meeting with the CIA and when he removes documents from the institute. Weeks and months pass. There is no news of how the KGB investigation at the institute concluded. It is also unknown what the investigation was related to. One thing is clear. Under no circumstances does Adolf Tolkachev intend to be captured alive. In the late 70s, Edward Lee Howard worked at a consulting firm in Chicago. He was 28 and wanted to change his life and see the world. Therefore, he decided to apply to the CIA. Howard went through training, completed all necessary tests, and was accepted. In the year 82, he received a job offer at the Moscow station. Before his departure, Howard underwent training, which partially included access to some documents from the CIA's Moscow branch. Hence, he certainly encountered the codename Sphere for the agent. Whether he knew Tolkachev's real name is unknown. Just before he was to depart for Moscow, Howard failed a polygraph test. The same happened with several repeat tests. It was revealed that Howard had concealed information about minor offences in his past. This was compounded by already known data about his alcohol issues. As a result, Edward Lee Howard was not only removed from the Moscow station assignment, but was also fired from the CIA altogether. Before his dismissal, he signed a paper pledging to keep all information obtained during his service confidential. However, Howard was angry. During a trip to Europe, he contacted representatives of the Soviet embassy and agreed to provide them with secret information for $60,000. Among this information were data about a valuable CIA agent within a research institute working for the military-industrial complex. It was clear that even without knowing the agent's specific name, the KGB could identify the spy. It was only a matter of time. In the year 1984, despite worsening health problems and the fear of the Institute's investigation, Tolkachev continued to supply the CIA with crucial data. Often now, he did not take documents out of the building and took pictures in the Institute's restroom. Due to poor lighting, many frames turned out faulty. But, one way or another, the information from Agent Sphere still presented immense value. At one of the meetings, a CIA officer informed Tolkachev that nearly $2 million had accumulated in his account at a foreign bank. At the beginning of March, the year 1985, Tolkachev was supposed to have another meeting with a CIA officer. However, Tolkachev did not show up. For several months, the Americans left signals for new meetings, and Tolkachev again did not appear. Another meeting, scheduled for early June, was cancelled by the CIA due to increased surveillance by the KGB. A few days later, over the weekend, Tolkachev and his wife went out of town. On their way back, their car was stopped by traffic officers. Tolkachev took his documents and got out. At the moment he approached the inspector, several individuals rushed to him, seized him, and carried him to a service vehicle parked nearby. None of these people were members of the traffic police. All of them were KGB operatives. On the eve of this incident, Soviet intelligence services had conducted a search in Tolkachev's apartment. There they found cameras, a receiver, money, a capsule with poison, and records. In short, everything that unequivocally pointed to Tolkachev's work with Western intelligence services. A week later, a CIA agent went to another planned meeting with Tolkachev. Once he ensured there was no surveillance on him, the agent arrived at the location. He saw Tolkachev's familiar car. As the agent approached the car, several burly men jumped out of an ambush, put him into the car, and took him for questioning. CIA operatives found secret cameras, bundles of cash, and other evidence indicating that he was no ordinary diplomat. That same night, he was declared persona non grata and expelled from the country. In the Moscow residency, they immediately understood that if the KGB knew the exact time and place of the meeting with Tolkachev, it could only mean one thing. The billion-dollar spy's story was over. In August of the year 1985, a Soviet KGB officer in Rome surrendered to American authorities. Among other things, he revealed information about a valuable source within Soviet intelligence, known by the codename Robert. This agent was a former CIA operative who was preparing to be transferred to the Moscow residency, but failed the tests and was dismissed. For those involved with the Soviet direction within the CIA, there was no doubt that it was Edward Lee Howard who disclosed information about Tolkachev. The FBI interrogated Howard, who denied everything. He was released, but placed under round-the-clock surveillance. Nevertheless, Howard managed to leave his home unnoticed, fly out of the country, reach Europe first, and then to the Soviet Union, where he was granted asylum. In the 90s, he would write memoirs in which he would deny his involvement in Tolkachev's capture. At the beginning of the 2000s, 50-year-old Howard would die from a fall in his Moscow apartment. In the year 1986, Adolf Tolkachev was sentenced to the highest measure of punishment. On the eve of his execution, he was allowed to see his son. Tolkachev asked for his forgiveness. The son replied that his father had nothing to apologize for. In October of the year 1986, the state agency TASS announced that Adolf Tolkachev was executed for espionage and treason. Tolkachev's wife Natalia was sentenced to 3 years in prison on the grounds that she knew about her husband's deeds, but did not inform the authorities. In the year 1987, she was released and returned to Moscow. In March of the year 1991, Natalia died of cancer. In December of the year 1991, the USSR dissolved.